we're going to run into times where packaged software makes it harder for us to transform. The skills of our staff, external vendors. So how do we handle transforming our company when a lot of the work isn't done by people who are directly employed by us? Career incentives. So we may be encouraging people not to be agile and then asking them to be agile. And then lack of automation. And we'll talk through that. All right, we'll get started. So I'm Matt Van Vliet. I'm a Chief Technology Officer for Leading Agile. I also help a couple product startups. I used to have a consulting company of my own, and I've been doing a lot of Agile things since XP and before the Agile Manifesto. So I used to have a company that wrote unit testing software. Then I joined Pillar Technology, was there for 18 years and ended up becoming an owner of that company. And then I'm helping out a few different companies, helping Leading Agile start a software studio and so forth. So I've run into lots of impediments or barriers to Agile transformation, mostly as a consultant. How many people here are consultants? How many people are, so the rest of you work in industry? How many people are in the midst of an Agile transformation? Yeah, I guess to some degree you're always in the middle of it, but all right. So that's kind of the introduction. I'll have this at the end too, but if you want the deck, that's where it's at. We'll see how loud I get. You can all hear me fine? Okay. All right. So we're going to cover the 5 things that get in the way of an Agile transformation. Obviously, you just have to do the transformation, but there's some things that can slow it down. And what I want to do is talk about them and then give some techniques of how to mitigate them or get around them and kind of go to the next thing. So first, before I give you my 5 things, what do you guys, and I don't remember if they were in the abstract, so you might be able to cheat, but what do you guys think the 5 impediments to an Agile transformation would be? All right, so some of those things are just, in my mind, part of doing an Agile transformation. So we have to get buy-in. We're going to have to deal with the ambiguity. We're going to have to work through this process. I also think that we're going to run into times where packaged software makes it harder for us to transform, and we can talk about why that might be. The skills of our staff, like we need to do certain things in that area. External vendors, so how do we handle transforming our company when a lot of the work isn't done by people who are directly employed by us? Career incentives, so we may be encouraging people not to be agile and then asking them to be agile. So we can talk about that a little bit. And then lack of automation, and we'll talk through that. The first one came up, right? Different change cadences. The package is changing at one cadence, and maybe you're trying to innovate and change at another cadence, right? Tightly coupled integrations. So you may have a system you want to change, but it's integrated with the package, or you may want to change the package, but you're worried about all the downstream systems. So you can't upgrade without testing the integrations. You can't do the integration without involving the team. One of the things about Agile is we try to do the simplest thing that'll work, put it out in the market, test it, get feedback, and change, right? So that iterative cycle is hard it's hard to implement half or a third of a package or just these 3 screens, right? Because it's set to do a set of things. Now, it also can accelerate you. So it's not that you never should use it, but making good conscious choices of when to use it, when not, and understanding that if it's in your most innovative areas, it may not be accelerating it, right? So, standardize what you want to fossilize. So if we standardize on a package, those are areas of the business we just want to work consistently the same way all the time, right? If we're in the auto industry and we're going from, traditional vehicles to battery electric vehicles, and from a hardware-based solution to a largely software-based solution, we may not want to standardize. Not that there's a lot of packages for how you would run a car, but as an example. you know, I was at a customer and we ended up having a lot of requirements where we knew this was wrong, but we couldn't change it because we'd have to go change the package. And it was a lot of work. So we just had to figure out how to work around or keep going with it. So those are some of the constraints. What I want to do now is let's talk about what are some techniques, because it's not like I'm saying don't use packages. We're just saying be conscious of it, right? And understand that when you're trying to do a transformation, if you have a custom development team building a mobile app and you have someone installing a package, you're going to have slightly different techniques for how you do things, right? So one is you really want to double down on testing. So at the edges of the package, any interfaces, integrations in and out, you want to be able to have automation around that. You want to be able to mock things that aren't available, because now you can move the package. Since they're moving at different cadences, you need to be able to upgrade one without having to involve all the other teams. The first time you put the package in place, it's something that's, you can get all the teams rallied together and figure out how to do it. But now one side needs to upgrade and the other side doesn't. You don't want to have to stop things and change, right? You want to make sure that your version updates can be tracked in version control, which seems obvious, but a lot of times where things are configuration based and maybe they're not scripted, you're going into a UI, you aren't able to see all the changes you made, and therefore upgrading and downgrading and changing becomes created. And then, understanding the business capabilities and which ones need to move and be innovative and which ones you want to standardize, so you select packages in the right circumstances. So how many people are dealing with a mixture of like COTS packages and custom code in their transformation? So good numbers. Yeah, hopefully if you can encapsulate them and isolate them and deal with the fact that they're working at different cadences, and then after that you have to orchestrate and just manage and have good communication in order to deal with that. All right, skills of staff. So how do you see that as an impediment to your transformation, right? Yeah, I've been in environments where we said we wanted, to have a team, and, over the years we have outsourced all of development. So to have a co-located team of 10 people, they just didn't exist that were available for the project. So you definitely can have that, right? So the transformation, it's about learning. So you may not have the skills. You may have to get the team to learn. That's why we like to keep teams in place, because they learn how to form and act as a team. I was, one thing that kind of reminds me of is like, there's something like 10,000 chapters of Harry Potter on the internet that aren't written by J.K. Rowling. And, all those people who are writing those chapters are at work during the day and their managers saying they're not very creative. So one of the things is that we've gotten to the stance where we put people into a role and said, do it this way, do this, and we haven't given them, and then they go get their creative outlet at home. And now we're asking them to exercise different muscles during their workday and so forth. Another thing I want to do is, like, a lot of people will go through this transformation, but not change how they're hiring. So now you've got someone who's gone through a 6-month transformation, and someone leaves and someone new comes in, and you haven't hired for people that have that experience and learn. So now those people are coming into a team that's working differently, and they haven't actually had the opportunity to go through that journey, right? So looking at that, so the skill set thing can be, well, I'm bringing in new people, right? And I have to give people time to make the change to learn, right? So there's times where we just won't have the right skills. We have to hire or find them, but there's also times that we're teaching those skills, and we need to make sure that we embrace and do that. I was one time asked, the client was looking for someone that had 7 to 10 years of this Java testing framework, which had only existed for 4 years, right? And so a lot of times we're hiring based on years of experience or knowledge of a tool, but we're in a world where, if someone says, I want you to have 10 years of experience with ChatGPT or language learning models, like, that's not going to exist, right? So the speed at which you can learn, the speed at which you can do new things is going to be something that we should be measuring versus current knowledge. Obviously, there's going to be times when, you need some basics, you need some knowledge, but we really need to kind of be bringing in people with the right skills that have that ability to learn and grow with the team. I may have just said all of this stuff on the last slide, but view learning over current knowledge, upskill staff to take advantage of new technical practices. You're going to be teaching them things like TDD and refactoring, and building things in isolation, CI, CD. So you're going to be, you're going to have to invest and teach these techniques, but they'll let you move faster with safety. And ultimately, the thing that slows software development down is fear of change. So if I go change something and I'm going to break it, then I may be afraid to change that. I may decide that we should build 2 copies of this code so that I don't break the stuff that used to work. So building with these techniques are going to let us move faster, but you have to invest in the skill set of your people so that they know how to do those, so they're able to do that. Review job descriptions, talked about that. New roles need to become more cross-functional. Ultimately, I think there's kind of 2 roles on a team. There's people who know how to automate things, especially like a software development team. There's people who know how to automate things. They can build business rules into code. They can make screens, but they can also make automated tests. They can make automated things that set up your environment. There's people who are good at automating things. And whether they're automating setting up your server or your deployment or your business rule or what have you, over time, people tend to be able, there may be specialists in some of those, but they tend to be able to do those. And then there's people who really know the business domain, right? They meet with the customer. They can understand what the customer wants, communicate it to the team. They can go look at something we built and tell whether it's actually working and doing what we say. And over time, sometimes your business experts and your technical experts, if you work in the domain long enough, they know they are even cross-functional there. So a lot of times we start with very specific roles. I need a business analyst, I need a developer, I need a QA person, I need a product owner, I need a product manager, and there's all these things where in the end, you may have some of those roles, especially outside the team, but you're going to get more and more fuzzy roles as you kind of get into a transformation. And you need to make that safe so that people can progress and grow in their careers and not be judged that they aren't sticking to their role or what have you. All right, external vendors. So I'm a consultant. Why would consultants slow you down in your transformation? I'm hoping that I could speed you up, but what do you think? How many people work on teams with external consultants? So all of you have them. Why would a vendor slow down a transformation? Yep. So they need to understand your goals, and so that they can come along and be part of the transformation, right? Yep. Yeah, so I guess if you're trying to insource things, they could be there. And there is, there are entire consulting models that want you to become dependent on them, right? So I may even sell something at a low price, but then you need me to support it for all of eternity, right? And if we're trying to bring it in, if we're trying to automate something, I've been in environments where we're trying to automate something like the testing, and there's 30 people that we've hired from an external vendor that's in charge of manually testing, right? So there is some risk there. Hopefully, most of the time, we want people to depend on us but not become dependent, right? That's what I think a great consultant will do. And if you depend on me to solve this problem and I do it, you'll hire me to solve other problems. And most of your companies, I don't know your specific companies, but you're not going to run out of problems to solve. So there'll be plenty of work. So let's solve this one, and then we'll move on to the next one, not try to keep solving the same problem forever. But yeah, so I think one is, are they engaged in a way that's going to accelerate your transformation, right? If you say I'm going to have product-based teams that are cross-functional, that are going to work in a collaborative way, and then you have vendors that are engaged in a way that, are order takers, and they don't actually get to participate in the process, then now you're actually not encouraging your transformation. If you have vendors who are writing code that doesn't match your desired way to write code, so if you're wanting to write tests, if you're wanting to have mocks, if you want to use microservices, but you hired a vendor and said they just get to do it however they want, then that's actually going to make it harder for your transformation because you're kind of working in two models at the same time. So are you encouraging them to do it? I had a client just a month or two ago, and I was talking to them about don't train your vendors, engage them to become partners, and if they're not wanting to do it, then get vendors that are. And they said, well, who could that be? And I gave them a whole bunch of names. We were on the list, but I gave them like 10 other names, and they're like, well, why are you telling us to work with all of your competitors? And in the end, it's that, the competition is building things the wrong way, not like, you're not going to use all of one company, right? So let's get people in there that are going to encourage this, help drive it. When it's successful, we'll all win, and so forth. So it's not uncommon that you have to look at vendors. But if you start by meeting with your vendor and you say, we are going down this transformation, and we would like you to go along with us. So, make sure your people know they're going to be working in a different way. Make sure they know that it's important and strategic for us to do this. And partner with your vendors, because a lot of models are only going to have 20 or 30% of the people in-house, or maybe 70% in-house. So if you're going to have a vendor engage them in a way that's a partner. Ask them to come along with you. Ask them to invest in that relationship. And then if they don't, there's opportunities to look at other options and so forth. But a lot of times it's a communication thing where the people, on teams, if their management's not telling them or investing in them, they're not set up for success. So we need to look at those relationships. We can even put some of these things into how we contract vendors. Let's measure output, not input costs. Let's measure results, which I probably, again, talked about my solutions on the last slide. But talk to your vendors, go through the explanation, contract in a way that encourages the behaviors you expect. So if you contract saying, I want the lowest cost, and we're going to give you requirements, and here's how you give us results, and we want you to be collaborative because this is an area that we're trying to innovate, and we want you to fail fast and get results, then we need to contract in a way that allows that, right? Look at our incentives to make sure they align for what we're trying to accomplish, right? So in the end, you're going to have vendors that are more accountable to the outcome of your business, just like we're trying to get our teams to be aligned to the outcome of what the business needs, not just to say, if every project's green, but the business isn't getting what they need, that's not a good situation to be in. All right, career incentives. This kind of overlaps with some of the things, how you contract your vendors, how you develop your people. But does anyone have any examples or thoughts on how career incentives can slow down your Agile transformation? Yeah, I had a QA group I worked with one time, and we wanted them to give the developers their test cases so that they could fix them before they got into QA, and they didn't want to do that because then there wouldn't be any bugs. I kind of said, well, the goal isn't bugs, right? So, but they were trained to look at the requirements, build tests, and it was kind of like a blind test versus an open book test to say, well, like, here's how we should do it. But like, there are different departments measured in different ways, and if you didn't find anything in QA, right? I've also been with consulting companies that said, we're going Agile, we don't need to have QA anymore. And my argument's always been, if QA stops finding things, they're going to find plenty of other places to go do things, right? So we want, again, for like, if there's an incentive that tells you, you should do that. That's a problem, right? Do you encourage fuzzy roles or value them, right? So one of the things I talked about is you may not be a pure QA person. You might also work on requirements. Are you set up such that that's not how people are trained and measured and valued and promoted and so forth? So if you're transforming how your teams work, you may have to look at, well, how do we measure our teams? How do we measure success and so forth? Ultimately, do you value people being subject matter experts? Do you value them being technical experts? Or in order to be valued, do you have to move outside of the team and be in charge of scorekeeping or orchestrating, managing between teams or what have you, right? So we're trying to create teams that can be aligned as closely to the customer as possible and pump out results. And we're building teams that have as few interdependencies as possible. But our leadership structures, our ways of incenting people may actually encourage you to stop working on a team. I had, early in my career, I was offered to, I was a technical consultant building software, running teams, but still in the code a lot. And I got offered to be promoted to a manager. And, I really wanted to stay technical and do that longer in my career. And I really had a choice where I either had to, I could have stayed in my role, but not gotten more money. Or I either had to leave or become a manager. Those were my choices. There was not a technical career path that I could go down. So I left and started a company that wrote software, and I could stay technical. But ultimately, there's people that, if that's what they want to do, there aren't opportunities. I know an automaker here in town, and on the engineering for like a powertrain for a vehicle, the highest level engineers, let's say they have 10 levels of engineers, and their senior leaders have built powertrains before. And on the software side, the technical levels only go up like 4 levels. And the senior people have, know how to orchestrate and get things through the system, but they aren't expert technologists. And that's something that we're wanting to change and encourage, that the teams can grow and have that leadership. And it's something that can be valued. Now, it has to mean then that the teams are putting out more value, they're more connected, that leadership is actually translating into results. But that's something to look at. Ultimately, look at the career paths, right? Ensure they're not incenting people to leave your teams. And review the measures of performance, right? So are you measuring output or are you measuring input, right? Are you measuring number of defects or are you measuring the quality of your system? How well is this system designed to solve customer needs? And are we, can we measure customer fit and we measure customer satisfaction? Like, are we getting the results we want from the system? Not some arbitrary count of velocity at the development team level or number of defects found or number of tests run or something like that. All right, so why would lack of automation impede your agile transformation? Automation can, increase consistency so there's less mistakes. It also can increase speed. Yeah, and sometimes, right, there's not enough time to invest in the things that are going to make me go faster, right? So it's probably a sign that we're going so fast that we're never going to get inherently faster, right? Not orders of magnitude faster. Ultimately, right, if you increase releases and deployments, right, if you change more often at the same cost, it's going to cost more, right? So if I go from building every 6 months or releasing every 6 months to releasing every 2 weeks or every 4 weeks, it's just going to cost more. I mean, there's an overhead of a release. And so if I do a build to QA every week, because I believe in weekly sprints, so every week I've got to get it in the QA. Every week I've got to deploy it. If it takes me 3 days to deploy, then it's going to cost more, right? Now, if I can automate that and take the things that I do most often, right, and automate them, there's a saying that you take the hardest things and you do them as often as possible and they get easier, right? So if it's hard for the organization to build, if it's hard to deploy, if it's hard to get to QA, if it's hard to get customer feedback, let's do that more often. Let's figure out how to get the cost out of that, because building it should only take as long as running the build script. Deploying should only take as long as the deploy script. But if there's people, if it's a 3-day process to get to QA, so manual testing, now there's always a level of exploratory testing, right? There's people, what you want to do is, like I remember I did a project right past Y2K, and we had 30 people whose job it was to test. And they had, it took them 2 days, and they had a set of manual scripts, and they would go through them, and they would test it again and again and again. And we still would get in production, and people would find the odd circumstance, right? And we got to the point where we said, well, let's get that stuff automated. We got that stuff automated, and we didn't have the 30 people anymore, but we had 10 or 12. And now we'd run the automated tests, and if there was a problem, they'd go tell us what the root cause of the problem was. But they just tested, and they would find the anomalies, the things you didn't think about, because they were able to use, we kind of got rid of the mundane stuff, and they did the more creative or more exploratory type testing. But the same thing with, build, even like you have security and compliance where you have to do a penetration test. Well, again, let's build into our build process, checking for the known vulnerabilities so that our security people can look for the things that we don't know, right? We know that you should never write SQL code this way. Okay, then let's just make it impossible to get that into the repository or into production, and have them looking for the things we haven't thought of, right? Or some of the things that are newer or harder to automate. All right, so if things are hard, do them often and automate them if you expect people to grow. So another big thing we find is we'll go on to projects, and we went on to a project just earlier this year, and they assumed it would take us 21 days per developer to get up and running with our laptop and being able to build the system and run it, which seems like an enormous amount of time. And it took our first person that long. And but they wrote everything down in great detail. By the third person coming on, they had most of that automated. So now if you needed to set up an environment, it takes about 2 days. And there's a set of manual steps you have to do. But it's not like 1 million people join the team. So it's probably not worth automating the last parts of it. But just looking at that and having people whose mindset is, well, how do I get rid of all of this stuff? Because what you want is the value density of your software. The amount of time, what you're building in your software are things that customers are actually going to use to go up, right? So that means the amount of time it takes to build, the amount of time it takes to deploy, the amount of time it takes to set up a laptop, the amount of time it takes to wait on another team that you're dependent on. And we're trying to get rid of all of that and spend all of our time building what customers think they want. And as that changes, we'll keep going after that. So automation is a big piece of that, right? I had a client, and they really didn't get the testing, automated testing. They didn't get the value. They kind of saw it as a cost. And we were meeting, and they had this department come in and say that the data had to change, that the way we were doing it was wrong. And we didn't know if what they wanted to change was going to break the rest of the system or not, right? And so we were in a meeting, we're an hour into the meeting, understanding what they're saying. And then, there was a discussion that we were going to have to schedule a whole set of follow-on discussions to figure out whether this was going to break us or not. And so the client ended up saying, well, so if you have all these tests, can we just change it, run the tests, and see what breaks, right? And we changed it ran the test. These 4 tests broke. We said, well, we know it's going to break these 4 areas. And, we were able to move on. So like ultimately that ability to move fast is going to be protected by the automation, right? So, it makes you feel safe. And if you don't have that fear of change, then you can change more often and more quickly. All right, that's my deck. If you need the deck, you can get it there. Thoughts or questions? Right, so ultimately, the promise of moving to Agile is that I can be more responsive to the market and that I'm going to get more software out faster. The challenge is if I deploy, let's say right now it takes us 9 months to do a release and we go to production. And now I'm going to tell you I can do it every month. If I have a testing team and it takes them 2 or 3 weeks to test a release, and I have a deployment team and it takes them a few days to deploy, and the process of moving a release to QA takes a day, there's all of this overhead that is just going to mean that I actually won't get more software out the door in 9 months, in nine monthly releases than I would in a 9-month chunk, unless I automate away a lot of the overhead so that I can get as much of the time being things that customers care about. Okay, what's the biggest impediment I missed? Communication, yeah. Yeah, I mean, we talked a lot about communication to the vendors, but it's really communication to everyone, right? So if a team's trying to transform and the teams around them don't know what's happening, or if a team is being told to transform, but we're not explaining why or what the new expectations are, or if leadership isn't communicated well with, and we tell them, well, we're just going to do what we want, and we're not going to have deadlines anymore, then all of a sudden we're going to hurt ourselves, right? So communication is a definite barrier. Yeah. Lack of trust. Yeah. Trust is a huge thing, right? And what we're trying to do, and someone talked about doing your transformation iteratively and incrementally, kind of at the beginning. And I think, in the end, right, we're building trust with the business. If every week, every month, we show them things, like they're going to learn that we can build things. And if we, our say-do ratio, if we can deliver what we say we're going to deliver in the small, then they're going to trust us in the big. I think with a transformation, it's the same thing. You may, you go in and say, look, the way we're building this isn't working. We should change to this other thing. You probably aren't going to get the buy-in to just go do everything you want day one, right? So what is a slice? How can you demonstrate that you're getting better results, and then get more trust and build more opportunity? Being able to measure and communicate, here's where we were, and here's, because if we can avoid building something the wrong way, or avoid, because a lot of our measures, let's say it was, cost per hour of development. Well, what if we need a third less developers as we get more efficient, right? So now we can pay all the developers more, or all the team members more, and still get more output, right? Change the leadership. I mean, just like if we're transforming and the teams are growing and learning and we're communicating with leaders, all of a sudden, if our team members change, we talked about let's hire in people that understand where we're going and what we're doing. If the leaders change, there's the same thing, right? So do they believe in writing software the way the teams are? Do they understand the journey we've been on? Do they have good metrics for what the output is? Dennis Stevens did a talk yesterday morning talking about trust and how to talk to executives about Agile. And so a lot of it ends up being communicating in their language. But then, as things reorganize, as leaders change, knowing that you have to continue that, re-communicate, and embrace that is definitely a constraint. So there's no shortage of constraints on your transformation. Probably what we're learning here. A lot of the times it's going to be get feedback as often as you can, communicate, and eliminate dependencies. So automation is getting rid of a dependency. Building your software in a loosely coupled way with tests is going to eliminate a dependency. Getting as much on your team as you can so that of the skills so that you don't you're not dependent on other teams. Like all of those are going to be the general things. When you look at each problem, it's probably going to be a dependency issue or a communication issue or a skill issue. Cool. All right. Well, thank you.